With the Earth in the grip of accelerating climate change caused by the effects of greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels, how can new technologies of the fourth industrial revolution help? The Cloud Debate held in April unpacked the topic of clean energy and battery power. Today, we investigate how 4IR tech can increase the effectiveness of recycling and reforestation to help alleviate climate change. Tim Modise, South African veteran journalist, broadcaster, public speaker and philanthropist, will lead our discussion today.
Good day to everyone who has joined us for our latest Cloud Debate hosted by the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. My name is Tim Modise, and I will be chatting to a number of experts on the topic of recycling and reforestation today. We are streaming this event on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, and we encourage you to participate in the discussion. At the end of the discussion, there will be an opportunity to win a 4IR tech hamper, and there will be one for each platform. So be sure to stay tuned in and answer the question at the end of the discussion. This year, a new UJ Cloud Debate series tackles the hugely important topic of how the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, 4IR tech, can be applied to positively impact the harmful effects of climate change. In April, we debated the issue of clean energy and battery power, and just after this, we were delighted to hear that the South African government signed a renewable energy deal to add 150 megawatts to the national grid by the end of 2023. Today, we look at another hot topic affecting our global climate: recycling and deforestation. On the topic of recycling, a linear and circular economy is often mentioned. Do you also wonder what this is all about? Well, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has put together a short video which will make sense of this for us.
Climate change is a result of our take, make, waste economy. And until now, we've looked at solving climate change largely by switching to renewable energy. We're replacing fossil fuels with wind and solar power at speed all over the world. But the truth is that the energy transition will only solve half the climate problem. It's like we've been reading only half the book, like we've been watching only half the movie. So what completes the picture? Transforming how industry uses materials and how we manage land. That is, transitioning to a circular economy. It's more than energy. It's about transformation. What does that mean? It means we address things before they become a problem and design out emissions before production even begins. We build an economy that eliminates waste and pollution, keeps products and materials in use, and regenerates natural systems. The circular economy can help address climate change by reducing emissions from industry, land use, and agriculture. So how do we make this transition? By businesses embedding the circular economy in their climate strategies and redesigning products and services. By governments setting enabling policies and putting the necessary infrastructure in place. By investors mobilizing capital towards circular economy solutions.
The circular economy plays a really key role in solving many of the problems around climate change. But what it also does is it builds a more resilient economy.
A complete picture of a thriving, zero-emissions economy is coming into focus. The mission now is to make it a reality.
Dr. Naudie Malan is a senior lecturer in the Department of Business Management here at the University of Johannesburg, where he teaches entrepreneurship. He was a visiting research fellow at Wolfson College, Cambridge, and the Center of African Studies. He convenes Izindaba Zokudla, Conversations About Food, which is a multi-stakeholder engagement project that aims to create opportunities for urban agriculture in a sustainable food system in Soweto. Dr. Naudea Malan, thanks very much for joining me. And you are doing some interesting work on the entrepreneurship front, which we appreciate. But I've had this concept of circular economy philosophy. I'm baffled by that. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, and it'll be a pleasure, Tim. You know, the circular economy is a really interesting concept that is different than the way we do business at the moment. So at the moment, we do business in what we call a linear fashion. So we buy a product from a wholesaler or distributor. It is changed into a retail form, and then it is sold. And along that path, there's wastes in manufacturing, there's waste in retailing and distribution, and there's wastes in use. And often the product is designed to be obsolete at the end of its lifetime. But this is extremely wasteful, and there are huge economic opportunities in this context. So you can design a product so that it doesn't incorporate so much waste in the manufacturing, retail, and use systems. You can design the product so that it can be refurbished or reused or reconditioned. And you can also design your enterprise so that the enterprise is, let's call it, watertight. So there is no leaks of energy, waste, water, labor, and value in your enterprise. So typically what you would do is you would build very tight circular systems with your customers, with your suppliers, with your waste managers, so that you recover the value of these wastes that you generate in your production and retail process. And that creates savings, and significant savings if you do it right. And this is going to be the future of manufacturing and business, because the savings you create will enable you to deliver a product that's competitive, a higher value at lower cost, and it has benefits for society. Because as we recover the waste in manufacturing processes, instead of just discarding the waste and losing that value, we can create opportunities there, and not just recycling, but recycling and reprocessing, remanufacturing, etc. So this is really the frontier of business. And it is really important and has immediate applications in the agriculture field, where we use regenerative and conservation farming systems, but especially in your high-tech sectors. For instance, a laptop has 300 grams of gold in it, and we often just discard these things. So these circular systems are emerging, and they are leading to a much more watertight economy, where the resources are used much better, and where there is a much better spread of the value that's created in economic development.
And of course, consumers have a role to play in all of this, as much as, you know, the focus is on what businesses can do. So in our households, how can we apply the circular economy philosophy in order to achieve, let's say, zero waste at home?
So you have to have a plan with your food waste. So I have the most simple way of processing it. I just take a rubbish bin and I drilled holes in it so the rats can't get in, and I just leave it there. It actually stinks less than if I leave the rubbish in my food waste in my normal rubbish and wait for 1 week for the rubbish guys to pick it up. So now it's processed with leaves and stuff put on top, and I end up with about 1 ton of compost per year from just my waste. However, there are technologies that are available, and one of the businesses I've featured in is Indaba Zokudla, the Compost Kitchen, and they actually work in Deep Sluit Squatter Camp. They sell an electrically powered food waste processor that sits on your desktop. I bought one for my mom. And this thing turns your food waste from your dinner or your day into compost by the next morning. And those machines are available at huge scale. So you could process tons per day, and you can turn it either into animal feed, biochar, food, soil conditioner, or compost. But then what I also do is I separate my rubbish, and I actually have to, because I live in one of the Joburg suburbs where there is a recycling program, and the recycling program is not actually operating, but the reclaimers are coming. So I separate my plastic, metal, glass, and, well, the paper gets composted. And I just keep it on the side, and once a week when the reclaimers come, I just give it to them. So it is a little bit more hassle for me, but I mean, I build good human relations with them, and my house is clean, and I have no waste that I generate. The little bit of waste, which is mostly the cat food, that I have to discard, and so that goes to landfill. But it is actually possible to do that. It also indicates that in South Africa there's a huge opportunity, and it is also maybe a business opportunity, because these things are high value. To build a new waste a management system in between households and local government that incorporates these informal waste reclaimers. Those guys bring considerable benefit to South Africa because they reduce the landfill costs to municipalities. All that stuff is sent to buyback centres, but it is an unstructured, reflected on sector. And we actually need to look at this. There are opportunities, and we can transform it so that it benefits us, and it could be of economic benefit to us, but we need to do it.
Talk to me about the technology that you may need in the context of a household.
Yeah, and I think for many households, what they would like to have is these desktop food waste processors. That Compost Kitchen is selling, but there are many others who also sell this. And these things can also be extended to industrial scale. So for those who are a little bit squeamish about their food waste, you can do that. And we must remember that the moment you put things in the bin, at that moment it's still clean because you're putting it in. You know, it's your food waste. You would have eaten it if you were hungry. So these things are not necessarily dirty. But it also brings in the philosophy that we might have to think about if we want to overcome the challenges of sustainability. And that is the realization that every person must have, that if I look after this square meter that I inhabit, and I make sure that my conduct is sustainable, that is all we have to do. Because if everyone does that, we will have a sustainable world. So it is actually a very simple step that we have to take. And if we take the step, it'll cascade through society, and we will have a new society, a circular society, which will benefit us all quite significantly. For instance, a small urban farmer in a township who has maybe 100 square meters to farm in, if that person can build relationships with their immediate community to harvest that 100 grams of food waste per person per day, and to bring that into the farm or the food garden, process it properly, and that could just need a bin with holes in, and these things do rot. I mean, dust to dust. Building ngazonke or circular systems with your community, so you harvest food waste, you communicate your specials and what you are growing on WhatsApp, and you build those systems. And then also the community can bring the recyclable waste to you in exchange for food. Immediately you generating value without any effort. And that can then be sold onto the buyback centers or to a recycler or further processed. So what I'm actually saying is the opportunity for innovation in enterprise form is there. And I would say township enterprises, those who are struggling, also spaza shops, they will benefit the most from circular economy models, because they are in the places where the most value is lost. And it is that value that's lost that we need to transform to live sustainably. So township enterprises can harvest waste, process the waste, create a compelling product. If you grow food in the township, using food waste, you can sell that at lower than supermarket value. And that means you can capture the food market in the township. So I've worked out all these processes on my blog on izindabazokudla.com, where I'm trying to develop a comprehensive program for enterprise development that will achieve sustainability, circularity, and also equity, so we can give livelihoods to people in townships. And I believe it's possible. It's going to be hard, because we are up against the whole system, but the whole system has to transform. And I would actually say these township enterprises could be the pioneers for the future South African economy. That is a resource conserving economy that will create more value for all of us.
Dr. Nadir Malan, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Appreciated this. Dr. Naudie Malan spoke about the critical role that the informal waste pickers or collectors play in South Africa. Let's join our Cloud Debate correspondent Louis Extian, who chatted to Tsepo Mazibuko, an amazing young man who has taken recycling to the next level.
Hi, it's Louis Extian here. I'm a correspondent for the University of Johannesburg UJ Cloudebates. Materials such as plastics and glass and paper are very well-known articles and materials that are ideally suited for recycling. And today we are privileged to be joined by an entrepreneur that is an expert in recycling. And his name is Mr. Tsepo Mazibuko. Hello, Tsepo.
Hi, Louis. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for joining us. You started, and it was quite difficult in the beginning, right? So give us a little bit of history after you've started the recycling business. What happened then?
Yeah, basically how it all started is, as you rightfully said, that we faced with a lot of challenges. And one of the challenges that I was faced with is unemployment. I just did it was after I did a data capture diploma, and I couldn't further my studies due to obvious reasons my family couldn't afford. So with the diploma that I had, I tried to knock doors and to try and get some job, but I couldn't find employment. And this frustrated me for some time. So with that, but I just didn't sit around and, become grumpy on all that. I decided to participate in an NGO whereby we were just looking after the needy, going to the squatter camps to feed the needy. And that's where now I was actually introduced to recycling, because we always saw the waste pickers going up and down with trolleys. And the manager of the NGO, he said, part of Brazil, because he was from Brazil, it's actually clean because of these guys. And to me, it didn't make sense. But at that point, I didn't know that it was a seed that was planted, because I became more curious to find out what do they do about this waste. And after asking them, I actually discovered that people are collecting this waste, sorting it and going to sell. And that's how actually I said, you know what, let me swallow my pride. It looks like it's a dirty business. It didn't make sense, but let me give it a try. And yeah, I can say the rest was history. I organized a trolley and a bag. But little did I know that it was not as easy as I thought, because there were a lot of challenges. Just being a waste picker, because you have packaging, you have transporting, you have volumes that you need to push. So through those things, it's actually the things that assisted me to look into it as a business, to say, if this now operates like this, it's more like a business. And the interest was started to say, okay, how do I turn it into a business? And in 2011, that's when I actually registered K1 Recycling as a business. I started being a waste picker in 2009. So for 3 years, I was on the street, and it was very challenging.
Okay, so at first, K1 Recycling collected and sorted and then transported the waste materials to somebody else, another business, who then recycled. But I also believe that during your progression as a business, you started actually creating what is called, if I'm not mistaken, plastic pellets. So you virtually integrated a little bit, and you do a certain level of production already in the recycling value channel, really.
Yeah.
So please tell us about that part of your business.
Well, that took quite a bit of time, and there was a lot of things that I had to look into, because one thing that we used to struggle with while I was still a waste picker, and even after I registered as a buyback center, because by registering the company, it was now after seeing not only the selling of waste, but an opportunity now of actually working with other waste pickers, being a buyer from them, rather than just going all of us, because we were traveling quite a distance. So while we were selling these recyclables, where we were selling them at this recycling center, is I then became curious to say, what happens to this waste? What do they do with it? And I would speak to the owners of the companies or managers, and they allowed me to go and look at the technology, the machines that are there. And that's now where another interest actually started, to say, I would love to do this one day. But for me to get to that, it had to take some there was a lot of opportunities out there, like the enterprise development program. So I applied to a whole lot of those, because remember, I didn't have the know-how of running the business, of putting systems into place. So I had to go now to be educated or trained on how actually business, I can do this into a business. So it took me about 5 years, going to different enterprise development programs, learning about, because recycling, remember, it's a very informal space, not recycling, waste collection actually on the ground as we speak us. So the challenge was, how do I take this informal thing and try to bring it into the formal side, which even today it's a challenge. So after about 4 or 5 years, that's when then I got to, after doing research on the pelletizing and of plastics material, then I thought, okay, now we are ready to actually try to tap into this space. And yeah, with all the applications that we did, looking for funding, we eventually were fortunate to receive some assistance and some mentorship in 2016. That's when we started to do our palletizing plant. So yes, today we are a palletizing plant. We're no longer just collecting and selling, but we collect, process, and then we sell to the recyclers.
So that technology, that process, tell us a little bit more about that. What happens?
Well, in the technology, well, even though it's a bit outdated, actually, I say it's outdated because it's a system that has been used for ages. What happens is a process of now. Remember, we do sorting physically with our hands, but now after the sorting, you've got a wash plant, which consists of the granulator, of a wash tank, of a centrifuge, of a dryer. So we'll take the plastics, put it into a granulator, turn it into cut it into small flakes, and those flakes now have to go into a wash tank that then cleans it from your soil or whatever contamination that is there from your mixed municipal waste. You get all food and all that. So the wash tank removes all that, and then once it comes out of that, and then it goes into a dryer where we dry it, and then we take the flakes into what we call now a palletizing machine, or it's a palletizer or extruder. Sorry, I was looking for the word. It's an extruder. So the extruder then melts the plastic. It's a system with heating elements that melts the plastic into liquid form. And then when that liquid form comes out of the extruder, it then goes into a cooling tank, and the cooling tank turns it again into a solid string. But then those strings, they go into what we call a palletizer. That's now a cutting machine. That machine then cut small pieces of plastics, and that's our final product, which is a pellet. So then pellets, we sell it to the manufacturers. Now you move from your recycling into manufacturing, who manufacture new products like chairs, plates, and so we are currently actually producing a raw material for the final product.
That's incredible, Tsepo. Yeah. So you started as a waste picker, you started organizing other waste pickers, then you became a collection center. And you still sold the raw materials to other manufacturers. Then you became a processor that now sells processed waste materials to manufacturers that use that waste to make new products. Is that right?
That's correct, 100%. That's what we do.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That is
thank you so much.
It's absolutely magnificent. But there's another piece of interesting technology that you use. And if I'm not mistaken, you pay your waste pickers that you buy from, you pay them through cellular technology. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been 3 years now. So we've got a mobile unit, which we work with one of our partners, which is called packaging. So basically it's a trailer. It's a truck that pulls a trailer. And in that trailer, you've got it's like your 4IR thing. We've got internet there. We've got solar panels. We've got scales. We've got tablets. We've got printing machines for your receipts. So basically, what this eliminates is assist with is the transport issue for the waste pickers. So we can now go on site, because normally we used to go is either fetch a waste picker from their house or from wherever they are to bring them to our site. So, but now we're working the other way around. So we take the buyback center to them. So wherever they are, even if we meet them on the streets, we can just park our trailer, take out the scale, weigh their recyclables right there on the spot, and immediately they get a SMS on their phone, they get a receipt where then they can go to a nearest retailer. Okay, currently we're working with the likes of ShopRite, but even a Spaza shop can actually be loaded on our system where the waste picker can go to collect their money. So that has really brought some change, because we had challenges of things like carrying cash, the risk that we carried. We were robbed once a couple of years back, but with now us being a cashless business, it has put safety on our side.
That's incredible. So you use a mobile unit, a physical mobile unit that you take to your waste pickers, but then you also use cellular mobile technology to communicate with your waste collectors and to pay them. Tell me a little bit more about how they get paid at ShopRite. So they get some sort of receipt, and then do you have an account with ShopRite? How does that 4IR technology works in the payment system?
Well, it's been a trial that has taken some time to perfect it. Because remember, a lot of our waste pickers is people who are illiterate, others have, uneducated, others are undocumented. So the technology at first, it required a waste picker to have a bank account. But we were hit with challenges that there are people with no birth certificates, they can't open bank accounts, they can't use ATMs. Then we had to relook at the system, which is now an app that is used to say, okay, can we not use, maybe, because all of them, one thing that we discovered is that they're all using cell phones. Every one of them, even though they don't have the smartphones, but they have a SIM card. So we then decided to say, okay, rather let's now use just a cell phone number to link them into the system. So our system is linked to a cloud, which now connects to all these retailers. Even the Wimpy, Mag and Bean, we've got all those businesses in the system. So what happens is when we are weighing, immediately when a voucher number is given, it's sent to the SMS of the waste picker. It's also sent to the retailer, to all the retailers. So a waste picker, when he receives an SMS, he's got a code that we just register them with a code on our cloud or in the app. And then that code is what the retailer will identify them with. But from our side, they will come with a voucher number, which they can take to either whichever retail company that we're working with or restaurants. It's up to them. So there's two options there. They can either what you call cash out the money, or use it to buy groceries or thingy. So it's all run by a cloud and an app that manages all the the communication between the waste picker, the unit, and the retailers.
This means, Tsepo, allow me to say it, but you're at the absolute cutting edge of fourth industrial revolution technology as far as it comes to recycling, and that's incredible, because you're using the combination between physical world mobility and internet and cloud mobility to make your business run better, to provide data, to pay your providers of the waste products. Congratulations, Tsepo. Not only were you a waste picker yourself, who then started a business, who became a collector of waste, then became a processor, and now you're at the very forefront of managing the recycling business and process through the use of 4IR technology. I'm getting goosebumps here. It's such a good story. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tsepo, from K1 Recycling.
When we talk about recycling, we often think of plastic and paper foremost, but there is a whole other category, e-waste. I now speak to Nikki Jansen van Rensburg, Manager of Sustainable Socio-Technical Systems at the University of Johannesburg, about this. Nikki, thanks very much for joining us. Please explain to us what e-waste is.
I think we need to really understand the terminology, and it's probably a mistake talking about it from a waste perspective, because it's such a valuable thing. So waste electronic or unused electronic and electrical equipment is one of the biggest challenges that we are being faced with at the moment. It's the largest growing waste stream globally, and it's actually got so much value locked up in it, and we can reduce a lot of the processes, if we can apply a more circular approach to dealing with our unused electronic and electrical equipment.
So generally speaking, how are we managing this in the South African context? I mean, it sounds to me like these are things that still have to be considered and ideas and policies implemented. But currently, what is the situation?
The policies are changing, so we are seeing a move and a shift towards circularity, but globally we're still figuring out the business model. So for something to be sustainable, it's people, planet, profit. All three needs to be, the boxes needs to be ticked. But in terms of policy, we're seeing those shifts. In terms of legislation, where extended producer responsibility is coming into play, where we need to make sure that the producers of these equipment that's making the profit out of it is also taking care of it. But in South Africa, we're actually not doing too bad in terms of our recycling industry. And we all know that the informal sector is actually subsidizing us to a great extent, especially in our suburbs where we're seeing the recycling and the buyback centres. And actually we need a better model there to bring that into the economy and to create a decent workforce and working conditions for the guys that are doing this, because they're saving the municipalities literally millions. And it's about changing the business model. So instead of buying your light bulb, you are buying the light. So in theory, you will have a better product that will last longer, and the service is what's for sale, not the product itself. So when the product is in disuse, it goes back into the economy. And if I can refurbish and reuse it, it adds value to that product. So the closer I can bring it back to its original intention, that's the highest value chain for us to extract and exploit. It can also go into diffraction, and we take it, dismantle and go into more urban mining situations. But there's more processes and sort of the value chain is diminished then.
Now, at an individual level, what is it that we can learn? What can we do with all the phones that we collect, the computers that we upgrade now and again? Can we make a start at that level?
I think as consumers, we need to be aware of the choices that we make. And there's a saying that says we're too poor to buy cheap. So often the more expensive equipment will last longer. But we tend to see that we are dumping into our economy these low-cost pieces of equipment that doesn't have an afterlife. So you need to consider what is the repair and maintenance and second-hand value of the equipment that we are dealing with, and how do we as consumers manage those pieces of equipment and to extend the life and to create opportunities for that. We facilitate, there's quite a few companies that deal with refurbishing and renting out these kind of equipment. So if you maybe at a bigger scale have a small business and you have your own office equipment, instead of buying those laptops that you're going to have to replace in a 3-year period, rather look at a leasing model. So it's a lot to do about the services economy versus owning that commodity and how that second-hand life will be managed.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Pleasure talking to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. The second part of our program today is about reforestation. Before I chat to Professor Ed Mitchard about this, let's look at an inspiring story of how one person can make a difference in the climate change debate.
Far away, in a remote region of India's northeast, there lies a giant island in the middle of a river. It's called Majuli Island. It has its own unique language, culture, religion, and history. Majuli Island is slowly being destroyed. It's being destroyed by floods caused by global warming. It's estimated that the island could be completely gone in 30 years. This is Jedab Payeng. He comes from Majuli Island. When Payeng saw his island being destroyed, he decided to do something about it, so he started planting trees on a desolate sandbar. That was in the 1970s. Today, his forest is larger than Central Park. It's home to elephants, rhinos, and birds. This is the incredible story of Payeng and his forest.
বাটত মানে এক্সিডেন্ট বেছি হৈছে জাহাজত মাল কৰিয়া বাছবোৰ আগত আছিল তেতিয়া এক্সিডেন্ট নাছিল এই ককিলামুকতে জাহাজ চপাই নিমাটি ঘাটতে চপাই তেতিয়া ইমান এক্সিডেন্ট নাই
Ed Mitchell is the Professor of Global Change Mapping at the University of Edinburgh and also co-founder of the tech company Space Intelligence. Professor Ed Mitchell, thanks very much for joining us and talking to us. Give me a global perspective on the situation regarding forests, peatlands, and ecosystems.
Well, I wish it was better news, to be honest. We have lost about 10% of the world's forests since I started my PhD in 2007, looking at deforestation, which is a bit horrifying when you think about it, because throughout that period, we have known very much that climate change is accelerated by habitat destruction, and we've already cleared about half the world's forests. So we did already have a lot of space for agriculture and other activities that we use this natural environment for. So yeah, the news is not good from a point of view of clearing of forests. We know less about peatlands and wetlands, but all the evidence suggests that they've had a greater rate of clearance and modification and destruction than the world's forests.
And where do you think the worst degradation is taking place in the world?
Depends on the time frame you're looking at. So I'm sitting in Scotland in the UK. This country used to be about 95% forest covered and is now less than 20% forest covered. So most of that deforestation has happened more historically. There's actually been an increase in forest cover over the past 100 years or so. But yeah, historically, it's North America and especially Europe have had enormous amounts of clearance. The tropical areas and the boreal regions have much greater forest cover left, but they're suffering deforestation and degradation much more over these more recent decades because they were the areas where there was a lot of forest left, I guess. But clearly, if we're going to do something about it now, we can try and provide incentives to try and stop deforestation in particularly tropical countries, which have massive biodiversity as well as massive carbon stores in their remaining natural ecosystems. And it's in the world's interest not to cut down those forests. There's also a case for restoring forests in the tropics, the Northern Hemisphere and within the Western world. But it's far more expensive to restore forests than it is to protect forests that are already there. It takes a very long time for carbon, especially biodiversity, to return. So I would say we should put a lot of emphasis on trying to stop deforestation. It's just crazy to be trying to put money into things like restoring forests or converting our power grids to renewables if we're still cutting down and burning forests at the rate we're doing at the moment.
Now, you are very much involved in the technology space, looking at ideas and methods of mitigating the degradation of the environment, as we've just said. Tell me about the emerging technologies that you think can help in mitigating the problem that we're living with now.
Sure. So yeah, the main thing I do is try and develop and ensure they're used new methods of using satellite data to monitor the world's forests and peatlands. We have great satellites up there collecting lots of data that's available free to all of us, mostly funded by the US and Europe through NASA and the European Space Agency and the Copernicus program. That's fantastic. We're not actually using that satellite data very well for the natural world. It's quite difficult in practice to use satellite data to look at forests. Most of the world is cloudy most of the time, so using traditional kind of optical satellites, mostly you just see white and you have to filter out those clouds and find the images that actually see the forests. There's another type of technology I use a lot called synthetic aperture radar satellites. Mostly weren't put into orbit to look at forests, but they have the advantage they can see forests, but they can also see through clouds and see something of the structure of the forests. But again, that data is quite difficult to use. So I've been an academic at the University of Edinburgh for a long time. I'm a professor there, and I developed new methods of using those. To be honest, that was I love my work at the university. It's been great to develop new technologies and train a lot of students and PhD students over the years. But really, that wasn't being used in practice by governments and companies very much. You spend a long time in academia producing these academic papers and sending them out into the world. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be taken up by people. So with a colleague, Murray Collins, in 2018, I founded a company called Space Intelligence. We're now 20 people working to try and use these types of technologies in anger in real projects to try and save forests by providing the latest monitoring data so that projects can claim carbon credits for protecting forests that would have been cut down, or plan their activities to restore forests or stop illegal logging. So that's using a range of different free satellite data to produce high quality maps.
Give me an example of a case study where you have practically applied these technologies and that give you optimism that these could be applied elsewhere in the world.
Sure. So one really nice project we've been involved with is run by a company called Green Gold Forestry in Peru. They're a company that used to do sustainable-ish logging of tropical forests, so taking out some trees and selling them. But they decided that they didn't want to be involved in logging anymore. They wanted to protect and restore the forests that they had the licenses to log. So they were going to stop logging and claim carbon credits for stopping and for the recovery of the forest from its previous logging. This is very biodiverse rainforest in Peru. What we were able to do is produce satellite maps showing the amount of carbon stored in each pixel, each 20 by 20 meter section of that forest, through using a combination of different types of satellite data and artificial intelligence. And through producing those carbon maps, they're able to see where the high and low biomass bits of their forest are, track that changing through time. And if there is any illegal logging that comes into their area, they'll pick that up quickly because they'll see the reduction in carbon in their forest. So our technology there is enabling a type of forest protection project that wouldn't really be possible using more traditional methods of assessing carbon stocks. That would have involved field teams going in, setting up lots of forest inventory plots, maybe hundreds across the study site, and then patrols going around this inaccessible area, checking every year that there wasn't illegal logging happening. That ends up being very expensive, probably quite carbon intensive, because you spend a lot of diesel on boats going around, and probably makes that type of project unviable. Satellite data, this kind of eye in the sky that collects the same data again and again, is freely available, is the ideal thing for monitoring remote bits of forest. But yes, you need artificial intelligence and clever ways of dealing with lots of cloudy images to be able to do that.
And given where you are now and the studies and research that you've conducted over the years and the new technologies that are emerging that seem to be helpful in solving the problem, are you optimistic that the world is now much more aware and willing to mitigate deforestation as well as deal with any other issues that have got to do with climate change?
Yeah, it's hard. I'm not a politician. I can't really influence policy to a great degree, much as I would love to. I'm much more confident that people are aware of the trade-offs. So policymakers in many countries that have high forests and high rates of deforestation, they're aware that if they're issuing licenses to cut down or log forests, that's going to have consequences from a carbon point of view and consequences for climate change. So I'm very happy about that. I'm happy about the tools we have available from satellite point of view and analysis to be able to monitor those forests. And so we can give those governments the data to tell them what's happening and what will happen if they do different development pathways. Whether all the world's countries are really going to have more forest cover in 10 years than they have now, I don't think so. I think many countries will carry on a path of deforestation. I just don't think the economic incentives are there. I believe that the richer Western countries should be paying other countries to go on alternative development paths that allow them to keep their forest cover. And I think that will be successful in some countries, but I can't see it happening everywhere, sadly.
Professor Ed Mitchard, thank you very much for talking to us. Appreciate it. Misha Tisdale is a South African-born environmental and social change activist. He's the co-founder and director of the Green Pop Foundation. Misha Tisdale, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us about your projects and your views on reforestation and so forth. But then I'm asking you from an urban context, why do forests matter, you think?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I suppose that's it's quite a broad question. I think forests matter in many different contexts. We say that in many places there are urban forests. If you look at Johannesburg, Cape Town hopefully is not too far behind, but the forests provide an urban benefits from an ecological point of view. They are cooling, so they allow for us to have less air conditioning systems. They encourage species to come into our urban contexts, and I think that in itself provides a calming background for the busyness of cities. And they clean the air. They take carbon monoxide and other noxious gases out of the air. And in a place that is filled with pollutants, we need to really bring as much biodiversity into our cityscapes as possible.
What is the current situation in South Africa and Africa specifically regarding forests, peatlands, and the ecosystem?
So Africa is a big place, and I'm not an expert in peatlands. I think ecosystems is a broad term because, every space is, in a sense, an ecosystem. If you're in an office, you're in an ecosystem because there are people there and we're part of the ecological makeup. But in terms of forests, there is a huge amount of degradation that's happening in the tropical forests around Central Africa, which is of big concern. A lot of it relates directly to our requirements around fuel. There is also a limited amount of trees that are in South Africa. We have less than 0.5% forest cover. And while we're primarily not a forest country, we are largely made up of grasslands and desert, semi-desert, arid regions, and fynbos. The few pockets of forest that we have left have been under threat for the last 200 years. But the reality is that we have a massive issue with non-indigenous vegetation. Eucalyptus, black wattle, pine trees. And if you look what happened across the garden route in 2017 and 2019 with those fires, I think one year was just 80,000 hectares. That is largely to do with the pervasive nature of these species, which essentially crowd out any kind of biodiversity. So if you're talking about ecological systems, if you're talking about ecosystem function and how well our ecosystems are performing in South Africa, I would say that they're generally under threat. Globally, we've consumed 70 to 80% of the planet in terms of shifting terrestrial land into urbanization, agriculture, roads, mining, etc. And in doing so, we reduce our resilience and we put species under threat. So this is a human issue in that the less biodiversity we have around us, the less resilient we are as a global population. The benefits that can come out of having a functional ecosystem. If you have just eucalyptus, that's not a functional ecosystem. There's very little else functioning in there. If you walk in there in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night, you don't hear insects, you don't hear birds because they don't operate in that system. They need biodiversity. And I think that South Africa is a microcosm of that. We have done well to pillage the Karoo. If you look at KwaZulu-Natal, it is literally just industrial forestry, like from the coast inland, and then Johannesburg and Mpumalanga from a mining perspective, and the Western Cape from an agricultural perspective. So we've had this really interesting relationship with our ecosystems, and I think now we're only realizing with climate change and food insecurity and things like COVID, where we realize actually the way we engage with the world is just unsustainable. And we really need to start seeing ecosystems from all their benefits, the multiple benefits, and many of them are financial. The biodiversity economy is massive if we can tap into it in the right way.
Let me ask you a question about a case study, a practical situation that you can reference. Talk to us about where these technologies have been applied and there are projects underway that are helping reforest the ecosystems that may have been damaged in the past?
So, I mean, I think what's interesting about these technologies is they are actually literally just coming on board. They are not being applied yet in a South African or an African context. So one of the experiences we've had is one of our partners is an organization called VIDA, Village Data Analytics. And they were essentially commissioned to look at villages around the continent that required energy. And by giving energy, what you do is people need energy to cook, they need energy for lighting, they need energy for a whole spectrum of things. And if they don't have access to electrical energy, then they get that energy elsewhere. And often that energy places challenges on the direct ecosystem because you're promoting cutting down of trees to create charcoal and then using it to sell on to get fuel gas to burn it or whatever the case may be. And this technology that they developed essentially allows for you to get satellite imagery of a landscape and then work out where is the most dense population of people living in an urban context, how much access to sunlight do they have, and then you can weigh up where would your development funding be best spent based on these different metrics. For me, what's really exciting about this, and I think that we're not far off from this because it's based on AI. So once you get a certain number of ground truths, in other words, if we get a satellite to take photographs before we planted, and then after we planted, and then a year later, and we give them a species background, then they'd be able to say, okay, our AI has been able to understand this, and we can then apply it into other places as long as it's contextualized within the types of species that we're looking at. What it can do then is we can apply it in many different measures. And one of the things that I think is the most exciting about it is there are huge global policies that are trying to be developed around reducing deforestation, around conserving landscapes. And the problem is that we have financial interests that potentially push us in a different direction. We have countries and policies that are maybe committing to things like biodiversity laws and policies, or the climate accord at Paris, but they're not necessarily following through with this. These type of technologies give us the opportunity to have hyper transparency. So if you can look at a countrywide basis and say, right, we know we have this many hectares, and we can tell you every 6 days, we can get a fresh take on what's happening on this landscape. So if we're looking at what's happening in Southeast Asia with palm oil, if you're looking at what's happening in northern Mozambique with the cutting down of rosewood trees and teak trees, if you're looking at Central Africa, in Congo and DRC, etc., where there is big investment happening from the petroleum industry because they're trying to tap into these pipelines, ultimately what we can say is we know that these things are happening and you can pick up on them very quickly. Whereas before, you know, the world would be completely ignorant to what was really happening on the ground. So these technologies give us an opportunity to start seeing landscapes very differently and start making business, government, and individuals accountable for what's really happening on the ground.
And what's your impression about the different communities? Do you think that communities are beginning to appreciate the efforts and initiatives around reforestation and the protection of the ecosystems?
I think broadly, South Africans, it doesn't matter what community you're from, are not entirely aware of the extent of how degraded our ecosystems are. You know, we live in these kind of urban bubbles and we are just constantly bombarded by every other bit of news, whether it's corruption or the tragedies of what's happening in Ukraine or COVID. And it's quite hard for us to have a perspective that's beyond our own urban environment, even to the point of creating dissonance so that we can actually get through life. We are coming into this decade, 2020 to 2030, the decade on ecosystem restoration. And the logic behind this decade is that in order for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, and each one of them is based on a mission that we need to try and get to create equity for landscapes, for animals, for all humans, and to come to a place that everyone prospers. And the only way that we can get those 17 goals to be achieved, okay, is that we need to start with a foundation. And that foundation is landscapes. You know, we can't get to gender equity and stop gender-based violence. We can't get to food sovereignty or food security. We cannot get to the education of all people unless we have healthy ecosystems. Because if you have a degraded ecosystem, you can't grow food. If you have a degraded ecosystem, historically, if you look around Africa, women have to walk further and further to go and collect firewood, and that puts them into a volatile situation. Look at any of the Sustainable Development Goals. Health, to produce medicine, what percentage of our medicines come from nature? It's impossible to get to achieving these goals without looking at the ground beneath our feet and saying, we need to heal the earth. And in healing the earth, we can start to achieve all of these other things. And they can be integrated. It's not just to say, well, let's do this first and we'll get to that later. We need to do them at the same time. But if you look across South Africa and you say, where do we begin? We need to bring stakeholders together. We need to bring government and ensure that they're motivated. We need to bring civil society and enable them. And we need to bring communities and ensure that we're speaking to the values of what they're wanting to achieve with the logic of what really needs to be achieved, marry those and start moving forward.
Thank you very much. A pleasure talking to you. And now for the question that can put you in line to win a 4IR tech hamper. What is the name of the inspirational young man who was a waste picker, but is now the founder of K1 Recycling? You can either answer in the chat or send your answer to marketingbrand@uj.ac.za. Thank you so much for joining us today and for the great engagements on the various platforms. Make sure you join us again in September for the next edition in the 2022 Cloud Debate series. You can visit uj.ac.za/4IR to view this and other cloud debates and find out all you need to know about 4IR.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.